welcome everybody this evening, this morning, this afternoon, depending on where you're joining from in the world. Thank you so much for being with us today. I do want to firstly kick off and just, start by introducing myself. My name is Deepanjali. I am the Chief Operating Officer at LedBy Foundation, and I was part of this research. And today is a very special day for me. I also do want to give Ruha and Vanshika the opportunity to introduce themselves. I would have loved to, but what I've realized over the last few months is that I never do justice while introducing Ruha or Vanshika. And I'm so proud to be sharing the stage today with them. So Ruha, why don't you start by introducing yourself, and then we can hand it over to Vanshika.
Thank you. Just doing a quick reintroduction. My name is Ruha. I am a doctor and the founder of LedBy Foundation. I completed my master's from Harvard University in public policy a few years back and founded LedBy in 2019-2020. And over to Vanshika.
Hi, I'm Priyanka Sharma. My background is primarily in social, anthropological, and sociological research, and I was the primary research on this project. And I'm really excited to show you guys what we've learned.
Thanks, Vanshika. Thanks, Ruha. Before we kick off, I do want to share a bit of a background for those of you who may not be familiar with LedBy Foundation. LedBy Foundation, like Ruha said, was started in 2019 and 2020. And the intent with which we started was to make sure that we bring Muslim women into the workforce. What we do today is we provide professional and leadership development programs specifically designed for Muslim women. And our research today is we're here today to talk about our research, which is specifically on the hiring bias related to Muslim women. I do want to start by talking about what we're going to do today. So I do have a few questions for Ruha and Vanshika, and then I will have Ruha present the paper to us and share some of the insights that we have and a few recommendations and solutions as well. We have a lot of you in the audience today, and I do want to also be able to give you the opportunity to ask your questions, share your experiences. The chat box is open. We'd love for you to throw in your suggestions, feedback, your questions, concerns, anything like that in the chat box. We have somebody maintaining the chat box as well, so your questions will be answered. We will also have a bit of an open space towards the latter half of our presentation, where we do take questions from the audience as well. All right, with that, thank you everyone for being here once again. Ruha, I do want to ask you, and this is something that I know we've discussed previously as well, way back 10 months ago when we were initially thinking about what this research would look like, and we were just brainstorming. I want to ask you to share why you even thought of this research.
When LedBy was being incubated, and this is back in 2019, I spent the first 6-8 months only doing a very deep literature review on what exists about major challenges to Indian Muslim women's education and employment participation. And during that time, it was made very evident the lack of data that we have about the bottlenecks faced by women from our community. There are a number of potential bottlenecks. We've explored quite a few. We continue to explore quite a few. And there are a lot of bottlenecks that we're trying to address with the kind of programming that we have at LedBy. But I also wanted to be able to create more data and evidence to be able to have an empirically based conversation when talking to people about the underrepresentation of Muslim women. And there are some things like a potential bias in recruiters that, as somebody who's applying to a job, you might never even know. So you often don't understand why you got rejected or why you didn't move on to the next round. So there is this kind of black hole that exists on the other side. And we wanted to open and shed light on that black hole and see, okay, are there bottlenecks over here as well? So this isn't the only thing that's holding Muslim women back, but it is something that is, and it is something that we can all take corrective measures for. So being able to really shed light on one of the major bottlenecks to success and to participation of Muslim women is why we went about starting this research.
No, and I absolutely agree when it comes to bottlenecks and to black holes. So thanks for saying that. The other question I know that we've discussed at length is, why should LedBy do this research? Why nobody else? Tell us about that.
LedBy's mission is simple but very ambitious. Our mission is that we make up less than 1% the formal workforce, but we're 8% of India's population. We want to raise our participation level to at least 8%, so it is proportionate to what our population representation is. That is our mission. More Indian Muslim women in the workforce. And that's why this ties into our mission. Again, to be able to uncover bottlenecks and then to be able to action upon them. We are, to the best of our knowledge, the first organization conducting such research in India. There have been similar researchers that have taken place outside of the country and even within the country, but they're not necessarily with the intersection of Indian Muslim women being brought in. So this trisectional identity that we're talking about. And so it ties in really closely with our mission. I think it would be a big success if we have more organizations doing such research, focusing on Muslim women and understanding obstacles and coming up with ideas and solutions to overcome those obstacles. And even if we are the first, I definitely hope we are not the last.
I agree. And I do just want to add there as well about being able to tie into the mission of LedBy Foundation is that while we are setting our program participants, brilliant Muslim women in our programs for success, what we do want to make them aware of is that external environments are slowly changing as well. There are challenges within the external environment. And this research actually just throws a little bit of light on that as well. So thanks so much for sharing that, Ruha. Vanshika, my question is to you. When we started the research, we knew that we needed help. And when we did put out the request, to our community, you reached out. So tell us why you thought that this research was interesting and what really struck you.
I think there were like a lot of reasons why I decided to work on this research, but I think two things primarily. Firstly, I had volunteered with LedBy before. I was aware of the kind of work that LedBy did, and I felt like, firstly, good organization, and I think contributing to that work was something that I wanted to do. The second thing was, I think something that Ruha also touched upon, was that the research didn't exist. And that research was incredibly crucial. And even the research that did exist around Indian Muslim women, I think a lot of the times was poor. So I think two issues that I did note when I started researching what this disparity may look like was, number one, even most research didn't really note whether there existed disparities in employment, because most research around Muslim women and inequality dealt rather with their social lives. So there was like this huge lack of recognition of Muslim women even as contributors of the economy, which is why there's such little labor market and economic research around Muslim women, right? So that was one really huge gap, I think, in research existing that I wanted to kind of help bridge. I think the second thing was also, even when this question did arise about how Muslim women account for a very small proportion of the labor force, the answer was generally that Muslim women aren't as qualified, right? And I think the reason why our research is so important is that we've proven that even when they are equally qualified, there exists a bias, which I think is incredibly crucial for us to recognize that there needs to be a change in how the hiring process is happening currently. So yeah, those were the two primary reasons why I decided to work on this research.
Thanks so much for saying that. And you'll see that I'm smiling because I've been in a hiring manager and I've been in talent positions and talent hiring positions. And you're absolutely right. This bias is so deeply ingrained and it's so unconscious that it doesn't occur to some of the best of us. All right, thanks so much for that, Vanshika. Ru, I do want to hand over the floor to you. And I know that everybody is eagerly waiting to find out more about the findings of our research, but I do want to hand over the floor to you because I know you had a few questions that you wanted to raise as well.
Yes, before we dive into presenting the paper, I also want to open up to the audience to ask your reflections on this topic. Have you experienced, have you felt that there has been an obstacle to recruiting or to applications for Muslim women? Any experience that you would like to reflect on? Feel free to unmute yourself and or raise your hand, and we can call out your name to have you share your experience. Hussein?
Yes, I would first say that it doesn't happen only in the female category, it happened to male categories also. And I've gone through this immense number of time in my career. So I always felt I was in the interview, sitting, having all the best qualifications and the experience. But when the results came out, the colleague next to me, and he tracked only with a female or male. It happens usually across, and I've gone through in my 24 years of career now and 14 years with non social development sector. This has happened in non social development sector also. So I'm eagerly waiting to see this results and research papers so that I could take forward and carry forward this for a long time within me.
Thank you for sharing that, Hussein. Sobia?
Yes, hi. So the discrimination I faced was actually not during my hiring. I was hired. I was working at this job, this company that I was previously working at, and I faced a lot of discrimination from the clients who were assigned to me. So it was a college counseling company, and students were assigned to us, and we were supposed to be mentoring them as career counselors. So a lot of my students, because I formed a bond with them, and we got really close. A lot of my students shared with me afterwards that their parents had some inhibitions about me being assigned as their mentor because I was a Muslim, and they were not really sure if, as a Muslim, I'd be able to guide their children in the best manner possible for college application. So that is the kind of discrimination that I faced.
Thank you for sharing that. Faisal?
Good evening. Thank you for this opportunity to ask the question. I hope your study covers the aptitude and attitude of Muslim women towards a job and their approach towards the job in comparison to the rest of the categories you have considered for your research. Am I clear?
Yes, you are. Thank you for your question, Faisal. I've noted that down, and we'll address it towards the end in our Q&A section.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot.
All right. Thank you all for sharing your experiences. Let us begin now walking you through the research that we have done. Starting off with our research, we were looking at employment for Muslim women at entry-level roles. And why did we think this was necessary? There is the objective case that you see that the Muslim working population in India is below the national average. And then even within that community, there's a very limited participation from women. To be able to understand what are some of the barriers, or maybe a barrier to this low labor force participation rate by Muslim women, we decided to conduct this research. What we did during this research was we essentially created two dummy personas, one called Habiba Ali and the other called Priyanka Sharma, more or less fresh graduates from comparable colleges with comparable experience. And we submitted this to 1,000 job applications online over the course of several months. To make sure that our process was scientifically rigorous, we also flipped the order in which we were submitting. So for example, if we were submitting for a job at company A, obviously one of the resume was going to go before the other, right? Priyanka's might go before Habiba's. So we made sure that that order was also flipped. And the second thing we did was we also shook up the resumes just a tiny bit at the halfway point to be able to remove some of the confounding variables that might happen. What was the result? We found that for every single positive response that Habiba Ali got, Priyanka Sharma received 2. I will pause on this page and let you also read through the context that we have over here. I'd like to bring your attention to point number 2. Priyanka and Habiba both got 88 similar responses, but Priyanka got 120 unique responses more, or 105 more responses if you subtract the unique responses that Habiba got. Our detailed paper also tells you how we calculated the net discrimination rate, which comes up to 47%. This sobering yet unsurprising result that we got was seen at multiple levels, or rather needs to be teased out. There are layers to this as well. So it's not just that Priyanka got more responses, it's also about how those responses were communicated to her. For example, Priyanka got communicated to or was told about her progress more by callbacks or actual phone calls by recruiter than her. So Priyanka's feedback from a recruiter was callbacks 40% of the time, but for Habiba only 15% of the time. These results then span across industries and across geographical zones within our country. I also want to just point out that all our calculations do have a p-value, which makes them statistically significant. That was the headline of what the research says. The more detailed paper can be found on our website and will also be emailed to you shortly. With this sobering and unsurprising results, I think what's still most important is, now that we do have this data, is to talk about, so what? What can be done? And there are 2 sets of things that can be done depending on who is asking the question of what can be done. One is individuals like us on this call. I think having that space to reflect on what Muslim and Muslim women's participation looks like in our offices is extremely important, and start having those conversations with managers. The second part is by recruiters and companies, again, to also take that moment of reflection and recognize that, especially in India, we are at this juncture where we can really look for women's inclusion to be done through an intersectional approach. When we talk about getting more women in the workforce, we shouldn't be creating the same caste, class, regional, language barriers that have existed even in a highly male-dominated society. When we're trying to level the field between genders, it's also important to talk about intersectionality within genders, and bringing that lens to companies' policies when it comes to hiring, when it comes to personnel policy, is incredibly important. So what you see on this page are a couple of ideas that can move forward. And I really like the point about attitudes and practices of Muslim women towards jobs. And that's perhaps the point that you see in the bottom, which is we do need more research to be able to answer all of these questions. And hopefully somebody will pick up a KAP study post this. With that, I'll end my presentation. Again, there is a larger document that is available on our website and will be shared with you over email as well shortly. Thank you all for listening. Now, moving on to the next phase, I will pass this on to Dipanjali.
Thanks, Ruha, for that. The one thing that I do want to, and I know that I've always gotten asked this question whenever I've spoken about this paper, but I do want to give you the opportunity to also respond, where we say that now that LedBy has done this paper, 10 months have culminated into this fantastic piece of research. What tell the audience and tell people who are here supporting us, tell them what we as an organization intend to do with this.
Let me take a step back and also walk through how LedBy looks at all of this. So we have three stakeholders that we work with. We have Muslim women that we provide training to help them with their job readiness and really help them get connected to recruiters, finally get placed. And that's a really sought after fellowship and accelerator program that we run. We have around 600 women right now actively enrolled in our programs. The second is we talk with policymakers to start bringing the conversation of Muslim women into employment and education policies at government level. And then the third part is that we talk with companies and advocate for the inclusion of Muslim women and active recruitment of Muslim women in their companies. Now, when you're talking to any of these stakeholders, what's really important is also to be able to present evidence. I strongly believe that our lived reality, our anecdotal experiences are incredibly important and they make us who we are, right? I'm sure we've shared maybe 3 or 4 experiences on this call, but every one of us could have 4 experiences per person minimum about how our identity of belonging to the Muslim community has set us back, has caused us pain because of some external situations and discrimination. But to be able to show this in numbers, saying that there is no denying this exists, this is a problem that needs to be solved for. And this needs to be solved for if you want to meaningfully move the needle, even on India's growth numbers or education and employment numbers. So being able to generate that data and then take it to the stakeholders that we talk about is going to be our next step, especially being able to take it to companies, for example. Let me tell you an interim result story. So one of our mentors runs this really big company that works with employment technology essentially. And I was telling him about this research when we got interim results, which are very similar to the final results that we just saw. And he said he is an upper caste Hindu, amazing supporter of LedBy. And he said, Ruha, yaar, तो मेरे सामने भी अगर प्रियंका और हबीबा का एग्जैक्ट सेम रेज्यूमे रखती, I would automatically move towards Priyanka. मेरा हाथ ही वहां जाता है. And what you've done is you've whacked my hand and you're now making me think. And it's really important because I also truly believe the fact that we have 130 people on this call, right? For a research paper, which is not the most exciting thing to a lot of people, shows that there are a lot of people who want to support, but also maybe don't recognize their own implicit bias and how that is creating obstacles, even if their heart is in the right place. So it's also about a wake-up call to a lot of people who do have good intentions, who want to take actions towards the inclusion of Muslim women, and then remind them that this is very well within your realm of effect to make these changes. So in a nutshell, our next steps are to take this and socialize the research that we've gotten with people who make hiring decisions.
Thanks. And you're absolutely right. I now feel far more powerful and far more equipped to have conversations with data-backed evidence when we are talking to companies and organizations. And I do want to throw in a little bit of light to what Ruha was saying. For people who have the best intentions, for those of you who joined us at the beginning of this call, I did mention that I was in a hiring position for a large part of my career as well. And for 8 years of my 14 years of my career. And in those 8 years, not once have I hired a Muslim woman. And not once have I even thought about that. It was only when, Ruha, when you and I spoke, way back in 2021, the early years of 2021, that's when I even thought about it. And I was shocked and embarrassed. And I absolutely have all of the best intentions, and I do want to hire the best talent. But does bias exist even within me? Yeah, it did. So I did want to just share that, and thank you for saying that as well. I do want to throw one last question at Vanshika. Vanshika, you've been the closest. You've been our primary researcher, and you've been the closest to this research. Tell me how this research has, either changed what you believed at the beginning when you started off with, and how it's also impacted you.
Yeah. In terms of how I think it's impacted me, I think going into this research, in my mind, I was aware of the fact that there would be a disparity, but I was not aware of how large that disparity would be. Like, I went into it thinking 30%, 40%. And I do have like Muslim contemporaries in my college, right? And never in my life had I thought about the fact that, sure, we're in the same class, but when we do go out into the world, that's not going to translate into the same opportunities, right? Because a lot of the times when we think of opportunities, we think of education as the way to achieve it, right? So considering the fact that even when we're in those same classes, we're not going to be able to be in the same workplaces, not because I am better than them, but rather because they're going to be on the receiving end of more discrimination, right? That was one thing. And I think while Priyanka and Habiba are just dummy profiles, there was a part of us that was a little connected to them, especially for Dipanjali and I, who were keeping track of all of the callbacks. And every time that Habiba did not get a callback, considering that my number was assigned towards Habiba and I would keep track of all of her emails, every time she didn't get a call back, there was some disappointment that I felt as well. And I cannot imagine how that translates for someone who is actually applying for a job, who actually wants to provide for themselves and make a career and can't do so simply because there exists a bias in the labor force that has nothing to do with whether or not they have the skill set required to do a job, right? I think just the recognition of my privilege, but rather about the fact that there's such a huge problem that exists. I think that was definitely something that I picked up upon. And also, I just want to stress the fact that discrimination is huge. Like, the discrimination was to such an extent where Dipanjali would be texting me every other day telling me, Priyanka's gotten this call back, has gotten this call back. I've gotten 2 callbacks for Priyanka today. And Habiba would be getting none. And I think that's like a really big problem. I think the second thing is also about how this is super crucial, but how there needs to be a lot more that needs to be done aside from simply this research. I think Ruha talked a lot about the practicalities and how we should how things should change in terms of how hiring functions and how we approach um, discrimination for Indian Muslim women. But I also want to note that in terms of theoretical research and just economic research, sociological research around Muslim women, there needs to be a huge shift that, number one, focuses more on how the economic prospects exist, because I think that is something that is incredibly lacking. And secondly, I think this is also a starting point for more complex research that goes into how the discrimination exists between, say, hijabi women, non-hijabi women, or perhaps within like higher roles and lower roles. I think all of those things are also incredibly important. So yeah, those are my thoughts.
Thank you for saying that, Vanshika, and thank you for sharing that. Okay, I do want to move into the next phase where I do want to be able to open up questions to the audience and to our supporters. I know that we've already gotten a few, and I want to do justice to everybody and be able to answer everyone's questions. So with that, could I request the audience to raise your hands if you would like to unmute yourself and ask us the questions. And when you do, please address it to either one of us, or if you don't know who you would like to address it to, then one of us will just take those questions. Or if you like, then just drop your questions in the chat box and we'll make sure that we are able to answer them to you either today. And if we don't have enough time, we'll definitely get you the answer over email. All right, with that, I already see that we have a few hands up. What I also do want to do is, I know that we had some of our accelerator participants, our program participants, who had sent in their questions to us. So what I'm going to do is, I do want to be able to answer some of those questions as well. So for the audience, do keep your hands raised. Let's just get to some of our program participant questions, and then we'll get to yours definitely. The first one, Ruha, I would like to address to you. It is from Fareha Noshin, who is an accelerator participant. She says, does this bias exist only for junior level roles, or is it applicable to senior roles as well?
So to Vanshika's point, we do need more complex research that teases out what the results would look like, and our research focuses on entry-level roles and how stark this is. Anecdotally, yes, this exists throughout the pipeline, and it would be interesting to see some research that teases out between the years required for experience.
I agree, yes. Let's move on to another question which was posed by one of our program participants. She says that, has bias become more prevalent during the last decade, and has it been multiplied in recent years due to the current presiding government? And Ruha, I'll throw that question again to you.
When we talk about hiring bias, I think it's again very hard to tease it apart from what is the focus on education and employment within the community as well. So the fact that you've seen a difference in the kind of aspirations and aptitude that women have been able to present and realize in India, and Muslim women also over the past many decades, supported by an economic boom, but then with continued systemic discrimination, means that the trend is more complex than one can easily or pithily say. Again, we haven't really looked at the trends historically, but I'll pass the floor to Vanshika if her literature review had yielded anything on trends.
Yeah, so in terms of Muslim women's participation in the workforce, that has definitely increased from, say, to when we had the data for 2001 census and the most recent data we have in the 2011 census, right? But that being said, that increase is not indicative of a reduction in bias, right? That may simply be because of increased access to education, increased access to opportunities, more shift to urban spaces, like things like that, right? So we really have no way to tell whether or not that bias has increased or decreased in the past decade, because as we've noted, there's very little research that was covering biases for Indian Muslim women in the past. I think that this question also pinpoints a very important part of how this research should be taken forward, which is to say that this discrimination is not going to be static. So while we have measured what this discrimination looks like today, I think it would be interesting to also go back and to perhaps look again at what this discrimination looks like, say, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, to get an understanding of whether or not there has been a change in the biases.
Thank you so
Thanks
much,
for that.
ma'am. Thank you so much for the answer.
Thanks for that. I do want I want to be able to answer one last question from our accelerator participant. Her name is Maria, and she actually shares an incident where she says that I was not hired for a lot of positions because of my name, and it's even though I had the same, even though I had more experience, my friend with lesser experience, she got hired. So her question is, I would like to know how I can contribute to changing this bias. And anybody, any of us can answer this question. Vanchika, do you want to take a go?
In terms of contribution towards reducing this bias, I think one of the primary things that we can do is enter these spaces. Like a lot of the times why discrimination does happen, and this is one of the hypotheses that we present in the paper, the reason why discrimination happens towards Muslim women is due to the huge disparity between Muslim women's participation and participation of, say, men or Hindu women, right? I think entering these spaces would then make it a lot easier to facilitate the entry of, say, other Muslim women, which is why I think LedBy is such an important program, simply because it helps to it helps Muslim women form those networks and then go into those spaces, which then also translates into more Muslim women accessing those roles. One of the measures that we also suggest in our paper, which once you do get a look at, you'll have a better understanding of, is that panel recruitments have been very effective in reducing biases, which is to say that having a more diverse panel of recruiters that does not simply include, say, Hindu men, but rather people of different religions, people of different genders, has shown that that bias reduces. So yeah, I think that is one thing.
Thanks for that, Vanshika. And the last thing that I want to say is that in organizations, talking about ethnic diversity or religious diversity is not really talked about. So when we talk about diversity today, it is more gender related. It is now related to LGBTQI plus. What we do want to throw light on through this research is that religious diversity is also a very important topic. So what I do request for those of you who work in organizations, those of you who run your own organizations, look around you. Look around the diversity that exists within your organizations. Is everybody equally represented? And that's a thought that I'm going to leave you all with. And with that, I am going to move on to the people whose hands are raised. Thank you for your patience. Juhi, would you like to unmute yourself and ask your question?
Yeah. Hi, Dipanjali. How are you? Okay.
I'm very good. Lovely to have you here. Thanks.
Yeah. So my question is, so while the literature review, did you came across any study where hiring is done by a central team, especially in terms of campus recruitment, and the candidate, joins the team after 2-3 months at a different location? And what was the experience? Or have you incorporated any such incident as well in the study?
So I do want to, and I will give Vanshika the opportunity to talk about this as well. So when we did start the research, what we did do was we made sure that we applied to positions which are traditionally for women. So we were looking at roles in entry-level roles at social media, in HR, digital marketing, content development as well. We weren't really focused on looking at campus hirings, but we did have organizations which are also very focused on campus hiring as well. I don't want to name organizations in this platform, but we did have organizations that did reach out to Priyanka, who traditionally would hire on campus as well. But did we look at it with that very focused lens of campus hiring? We did not. But Vanshika, I'll let you just throw a little bit more light on that for Julie as well.
Yeah, in terms of campus hiring, I do want to note that all of the questions about how whether or not the disparity exists in, say, campus hiring in different industries, in different regions, I think the implication of this research is that disparity exists across the board, whether or not it is of like quantifying it is what the research is, further research should be doing. But what I want to talk about with respect to campus hiring is that research hasn't been done before, and methodologically also it's fairly difficult, simply because that would require going into a campus and then having to dummy profiles and then applying to roles, a lot of which will be, I think, fairly difficult as compared to, say, research that goes into the open market. But I think also, secondly, I think if the implication for us is that there exists biases from those who are hiring for entry level positions, I think we can also assume that those same hires are going to campuses, which translates into, again, similar levels of bias.
I hope that answers your question, Juhi. Sobia, I know that you did get the opportunity to ask us a question previously, so I'll come back to you in a bit. But I do want to give a chance to Rao Nargis to unmute and go ahead and ask the question.
Hi, Deepika. Thank you so much for giving me an opportunity. Actually, my question is that apart from bias on the basis of religion, so what are the other reasons that biasness is caused for Muslim women, basically? Is it work ethic or something else? Because I have also been in industry, like not for a longer period, but I have been in industry for more than 3 years. And I do have realized that Muslims women, as comparison to like being a Muslim, I can understand and like in comparison to non-Muslims women, so people find that we do have some like a laid back, or we have some issues with work ethics. So is it the that thing, or is there any other reasons for this biasness? Thank you.
Thank you for that question. And I think it all really comes down to the same thing, which is a complex stereotype of what the Muslim woman is, right? And this complex stereotype is doing two things. It is one, making you think of that person and what their attributes beyond the CV are, which is exactly what you're saying, right? There might be some sort of bias or stereotyping about work ethic. And then the second thing this complex stereotype is also making you do is an us versus them, right? There is a lack of affinity to that person. And which is why my friend's hand automatically went to Priyanka's and not to Habiba's. So I think that complex stereotype and discrimination, none of that can necessarily be isolated. And that is what we also need to break down, because this is not founded in any sort of empirical evidence.
I hope that answers your
Okay.
question.
Thank you,
I
Rohan.
guess. Thanks. We have Umar Farouk. Please go ahead and ask your question.
Thank you, Divanjali, for this opportunity. The incident which I'm going to describe may be the rarest one, but I think somewhere we need this needs to be brought attention towards. One of my friends who was in Pune at the time, back in 2017, after completing engineering, she appeared for some interviews. She wasn't getting selected due to her percentage, but in an interview somehow he made it to the final round. And apparently the interviewee was a Muslim man himself. So he didn't ask so many questions. He just asked a couple of questions, and he said she was selected. She has everything what the company was looking for, but still he could not give a green signal to the upper management. She she asked why. So the man answered that as a married woman, as a Muslim woman, your primary responsibility is to take care of your husband, your in-laws, and your family, and to manage the household chores. So if you work in an IT company, so you will be surrounded by non-mehram is the term we call. I mean, other than brother and husband, all Muslim men are called non-mehram. So you will be surrounded by them. You will be working in a mixed environment. So some way you might end up compromising your Islamic values. So at the end of, in the day of resurrection, I don't want to be held accountable. I don't want Allah to punish me, which is why I'm not going to select you. You please forgive me. So she came out and she told this incident to the training and placement officer, who was an upper caste Hindu. He said that this is the mindset of your community. You are really backward people and all that. And after the next day she talked to me, she was crying. So do you think we can bring, whenever someone makes some such supporting claims, no, we are told to reach out to Maulvis and ulmas because we haven't studied the Quran in its entirety. So do you think the awareness should be brought, in each house, that under what circumstances you are allowed to work, where you are not allowed to work? Because religion, I don't support the man at all, but still, do you think we can bring this awareness? I'm sorry if my question was out of context. Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And what you're bringing to the floor is really the complexity that lies over here and the number of stakeholders involved. Our research was primarily focused in trying to eliminate a number of variables so that we can see a clear scientific relation to what we were trying to uncover. But what you bring about is really important. And yes, absolutely, all these stakeholders need to be brought on board. And work needs to be done to be able to help and support women make their decisions and make the decisions that best serve their personal, professional values and goals. So thank you again for sharing that.
Thank you.
Thanks, Umar. I do want to also just acknowledge that in India, it's fairly late. And I know for those of you joining from other countries as well, it is probably eating into your workday. So I do want to be respectful of everybody's time. We will be taking one question from the audience. So I do want Dr. Afshan Anjum to please unmute and ask your question. For the rest of you who have your hands raised, Dr. Lubna, Amir, Shabana, Sultana, please do put your questions in the chat box. We will definitely reach out to you and we will definitely be able to answer your questions over email. But we don't want you to not ask your questions. Thanks for that. For the rest of you, do put down your thoughts, experiences, questions in the comment box and we will get to them. Dr. Afshan, please go ahead and ask your question. We're unable to hear you, Dr. Afshan.
Hello.
Yes, we can hear you now.
Yeah, thank you so much. So I want to bring in a small issue. I don't know whether that can help or not. But the fact is that there is a categorization between Muslim women too, like liberal Muslims and Orthodox Muslims. And once you sit in an interview, you are reviewed on your appearance too. For example, if you wear a hijab, and whether you wear jeans or a hijab or a tee or a abaya. So most of the times I have faced this problem, like being a hijabi, you won't be hired because it's some way or the other way. They have a mindset that same thing, that your work ethics won't be like those of the women who are not who are liberal Muslims. And I don't think I think that not only the bias is between Halima and the other one, but it is between the liberal and the Orthodox Muslims too, and between a Muslim boy and a Muslim girl too. Even if you are not even at par, but you're very like a Muslim boy is not even standing where you are, still you face these issues. And it's really I have never thought about this problem before, but thank you, Rua, for such a mind-wobbling thing. Thank you so much. Now I guess I too I too am thinking critically about it, that we don't ever speak about these things, and we need to speak up, all of us. Thank you.
Thank you so much
Thanks,
for
Dr.
sharing
Afshan.
that.
Vanchika, do you want to respond? Yeah.
Yeah, I think from a research perspective, so there have been different studies being done about how appearances can also lead to biases. There was when you're talking about the hijab bias in particular, there was a study, I think, in the University of Windsor, which was studying whether a hijabi woman is less likely to get a call back than, say, a Muslim woman that did not wear hijab, and they noted that there was a 40% disparity there as well, where this hijabi woman was 40% less likely to get a call back than a non-hijabi woman, which again is a huge disparity even within Muslim women. And when you talk about Muslim men as well, I think someone in the comment section had brought up Thorat and Advam, one of the studies that we cited in our paper, and one of the very important studies about labor market discrimination in India. That study also notes that Muslim men, in a comparative of Hindu men, Dalit men, and Muslim men, are the least likely to get a call back, where Muslim men are only have the, I would say, 1/3 the likelihood of getting a call back than Hindu men, upper caste Hindu men do. So for sure, this disparity is incredibly complex. It is it extends to both Muslim men and to Muslim women, and of course, it manifests differently for different individuals as well.
All right, thank you so much. Thank you for sharing that, Vanshika. Just to close the conversation to what Vanshika mentioned earlier, that education indicators are increasing, employment opportunities are increasing with a growing economy. But that doesn't mean that when Priyanka and Habiba graduate from college, they will have the same set of opportunities presented to them. It is incredibly important to talk about this. It is incredibly important to be okay and normalize the conversation around Muslim inclusion as either a D&I point or even beyond that. It is time we own the fact that Muslims are a community that need active support and intervention and policies that support their inclusion. Thank you all so much for joining in on this conversation. We've seen some fantastic comments and thoughts in the chat, and we will be including that in our research and some of our next steps. The detailed study shall be emailed to you by the end of this week. Shukriya, Khuda Hafiz.
Allah Hafiz.
Thanks, everyone.